In previous modules, we've talked about how collaborative grant writing, working with other organizations, can really make a compelling special proposal that addresses so many needs for a community. But when it comes time and the money hits the account, it can be a totally different animal when you're actually managing different partners. And you don't have the same level of accountability with an external agency as you do with internal staff. So, in this conversation, Asia and I are going to be talking about just some of what does that look like. Programs do change, especially when you launch and implement. So, navigating around some of those conflicts when you're managing other organizations, when budget revisions need to happen, that can be a big sore spot whenever money's involved. And just talking through some best practice about communication, formalization, and just documentation so everyone's on the same page. There's no hard feelings, and everyone's working together toward one common goal. Yeah, I think it's funny. People have this concept of nonprofits of everyone being kumbaya, but it can be pretty cutthroat in a nonprofit industry. So I think it's really important to communicate expectations and rules ahead of time. Uh, in some of these collaborative projects, what are some best practices that you've seen so that everyone stays happy and focus on the goal at hand?
Leadership, number one.
Yeah.
Leadership that is really empowering the staff that's working towards this common goal. Leadership makes all the difference in terms of when you're having these kickoff calls with each other, you're having these check-ins or sessions to make sure that everything's moving accordingly to what you displayed in the grant. It's not so much about is someone doing their job. I've seen the best leaders showcase in these calls. We have an opportunity that not everybody has. This is amazing where we're at. And when you exude that energy, it gets your staff excited about making sure you're carrying all those juggling pieces because, as you already mentioned, the stakes are very high at this portion. And leadership not only is thinking about whether or not the impact's being made by the dollars they got, they're being forward facing in terms of we want the next one. So let's make sure what we're doing is going according to plan of what we expressed. And as you mentioned, that cutthroat nature can creep in if leadership is not taking into consideration all the external factors. And so best practices, I've seen leadership be very excited about the team that they have that's activating these programs and these dollars. And that's made all the difference for some of the lower level staff that's actually, churning out boots on the ground with this work.
100%. I would totally agree. Empathetic leadership is really crucial and that communication aspect. And you bring up a great point where the stakes are high for these kind of grants because ain't no one having 5 partners for a $5,000 grant. That the juice is not worth the squeeze with that. It's always these major, either highly competitive private proposals or government proposals where, once you get that money, they're expecting you to deliver and you want to keep everyone on track. And it can be tough. I think having regular communication, especially when there are those scope changes, is crucial. I think it's having a clear accounting of what everyone is bringing to the table in terms of what aspects of this grant project that you're going to be delivering on, whether the onus is going to be on one agency versus another in terms of management, in terms of personnel, in terms of supplies. And I think when you break it down to the numbers, it's like the budget justification we were talking about in a previous module. If you can really communicate why certain budget line items are crucial, it really helps iron out some of the hard feelings that might pop up where maybe an organization feels slighted. If they see how much more work one agency is putting in over another, it's a natural conversation to talk about how that resource allocation should be broken down and not be like an even 33 split or whatever, however many hands you have in the pie, making sure that the folks who are doing the most work have the most capacity given their way.
Absolutely. And also just coming from a standpoint of when you are able to make those changes. Communication is especially key because the stakes are high. And so if a change has to be made and you see it coming, say something.
Yeah.
Say something ahead of time versus at the latter end of it, because that can make or break that funder relationship. Because I think sometimes when you are in the nuts and bolts of the program, you got the money, you're allocating the resources, you're reporting, your requirements, and you're making sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. That is at sometimes you're unable to see those gaps that can happen if you're moving too quick and if you're not being empathetic with people and you're not keeping up the spirit morale of the team, because at the end of the day you want to win for the future ones as well. So it's like two things happening at the same time. And so it's super important to not only understand the stakes but be excited about them because you did win, and it's keeping that throughout. But that is the time to also communicate to people when you see something coming. Say something ahead of time, because you wouldn't want leadership, and if your leadership that's listening, you already know, you wouldn't want to have a tough conversation with the funder saying we had to change something, and the funder's like, well, why didn't you report that last time? Or why you ain't say something last time we checked in? It's not a good look for the future. The funder may smile in your face in that moment and say, okay, got you. Thanks for letting me know. But you will see the results if you don't get that grant next time.
Yeah. And, I think so much of this comes down to that relationship building, that communication, that leadership, like you were saying. I know we're focusing on the post award management here, but I think it's really important when this application is being developed to have all your partners be involved at the ground level. No one likes to be that token organization saying, "Okay, we need a food agency. Can you sign on to this
Right.
application?" So I think being authentic, being transparent, and inviting folks to have their hand on the wheel in terms of developing that application means that when the money hits the account, they all feel activated. They feel that we're all in this together, and I think that just helps foster this sense of collaboration and being able to put any issues that might pop up aside for the greater goal of the grant.
Absolutely. And your communities that you're serving will feel that
Yeah.
as well, even when you're doing the work, because it's nothing like being at an event or being at a food pantry or a food garden and you can feel the staff just trying to get data. You can feel that. And those that are in need and that are looking forward to the services that you provide at a low and affordable cost or free, right? They want to not feel as a data point. They want to feel like a human and a person with an experience that you're trying to better for them. So definitely take this time from this conversation that Anthony and I have had about reflecting on exactly part encounters that you've had throughout this process where maybe the scope had to change, right? Or maybe your clients received something differently than you put out into the grant. What is that contingency there? And also considering, which is the most important takeaway from this conversation we hope that you all have, is the communication methods that work well or the ones that fall short. Because at the end of the day, we are in post-award management of this section of the course, and the goal is to win the next one and to maintain a strong and authentic funder relationship.